All right, shall we go ahead and get started? Super. All right, well, welcome everyone. Glad that you have carved out some time today for LUAG at Lunch, a student-led series of conversations about works of art in the Lehigh University Art Collection. I'm William Crow. I'm the director of the Lehigh University Art Galleries and professor of practice in the Department of Art, Architecture, and Design. And I'm delighted to introduce Brooke Dunoff, who is going to be having a conversation with all of us today about some works of art that she has selected. And so we encourage you to participate and enjoy and hopefully explore us either virtually or in person at the Lehigh University Art Galleries when you can. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Brooke to get things started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brooke. You really gave a good introduction to yourself. So I'm an accounting major. We'll start with that. I'm a sophomore, and that's about it for me. So let's just get started. So welcome to this interactive LUAG lunch session. I hope you're all very excited to dive into one of my favorite photos from the Doing Democracy exhibit. In this session, we're just gonna learn a bit about this photo titled Chinese Parents Open Neighborhood Schools, and I'm gonna lead a discussion activity about each of the perspectives that we can see in the photo. So I'm gonna share my screen, and you guys can just give me a thumbs up if it works. We good? Perfect. Okay, so to start off, I have to use my arrow keys. We have a little bit of background on the image. It was taken by Robert W. Klein in September of 1971. The photo pictured here is at the Numqui Chinese School in San Francisco. That's in California. It still exists today. I think it was built in or established in 1919, I want to say. So it was about 50 years into the school's creation. And it mainly consisted of children of immigrant families from China. With this, there's a big tradition for families to prioritize education, and these immigrant families really wanted to continue their cultural connection for their children. So a bunch of families kind of got together to create the school, and they communicated their way into creating a school that would integrate the connection between the Chinese tradition of having like really smart kids and having the American education as they were living in the US. The Numqui School is just one example of how a group in America can demonstrate their power and rational desire to have a public school opened and maintained for their children. The school in particular was dominated by Chinese students, but was integrated with a few students of other races and cultures. So now I'm going to play a short video from the LUAG website that kind of sums up some more of the background and just reiterate what's kind of going on in the picture. And then we are gonna hop right into the activity. So just give me a thumbs up if you can hear it.
Since the official establishment of the Republic of China in 1912, many Chinese came to San Francisco, California to seek opportunities for a new life. In their new life, the emphasis on providing quality education on descendants in the Chinese culture still remained its influence in these Chinese immigrant families. Wishing to let these children remember the Chinese root, the idea of establishing a school spawned forth for these parents in the winter of 1919, so that a combination of American education and traditional Chinese values can be taught to these American-born Chinese youths. Because opening a school was extremely hard in China back then, these parents was prepared for all the hinders from government officials and financial difficulties before starting the project. Unexpectedly, the process of opening schools went smoothly with the willing support of local community and the Fukien Benevolent Society. While entrepreneurs from the society were eager to donate to ease the financial difficulties, spokesmen for the community said they are not opposed to integration and want to give parents a free choice of where to send their children. Taken by Robert W. Klein, this photograph depicts an everyday teaching scene in the Namqiu Chinese School in San Francisco, which is one of the schools built at the time. Most of the students are looking at the same direction, possibly where a teacher stands to give lessons, while the others look down at the reading material placed on the desk. Sitting in the front center of the classroom, also at the center of this photograph as the most conspicuous figure, Brian Addison was the only non-Chinese youngster in the classroom. All the other students, including the teachers, were Chinese immigrants living in San Francisco at the time. This school remained its influence even until this day, providing quality education for more than 1,800 students every year. This photograph represents how the democratic political system of the United States allowed the Chinese immigrants to blend into the local communities while embracing the cultural differences.
All right, so that was a little video, and we're just gonna, is it gonna work? I hope it works. Oh, she's restarting, that's great. We'll just go like that and it should work. Okay, so I have a QR code here. We're gonna go through a couple guiding questions, so feel free to write down and share your ideas. If you scan the code, or I can drop a link in the chat. Oh, Stacy's got a link. I don't know what that is, but
I think, oh, did I put that?
That's the link to, oh wait, I think.
My apologies. I had that on my clipboard, I guess.
Well, there's the link to the document that has a bunch of the pictures and some questions that we're going to follow for the discussion. We're going to kind of go, we're going to go with the flow here. And if you would like to, I guess, like write down or record your answers, feel free to scan that or click the link in the chat. If you do want to write everything down, please just hit file, make a copy so that the answers are on your own document and not public for everyone to see. And yeah, I'll give you guys like a minute-ish to kind of make sure that's all good and we can get started. I'll leave the code up for a minute. But just while you're getting those ready, I think we should start considering the fact that there's just to like warm us up, I guess, there's gonna be in the photo, which I'll have in the next slide, there's a photojournalist, and we kind of should think about how is that gonna impact like the students and the teacher, and how would it change the classroom experience in that day in particular. Feel free to just say it in the chat or unmute your mic and start talking, but I'm going to go to the next slide. I believe that's the next slide. Yes, it is. And I will get the questions up and we can start discussing. So if anyone wants to unmute themselves and talk about how they would feel if there's a photojournalist in the room, I know I'd be a little uncomfortable having just a stranger in the room. But yeah, anyone want to unmute themselves and discuss?
One thing I think is important to recognize is that having a photojournalist in the room is going to change the kids' behaviors, which might be like why they're looking specifically at the one direction, because there is a woman in the back who might be the teacher. So
yeah, the woman in the back is the teacher. It mentioned in the video that usually the teaching is towards the front of the classroom, so I'm assuming all these kids are kind of looking at the photojournalist. Thank you for kind of getting us into it, Tracy. So just to start off, like how would you feel just like we're gonna look at this kid first, the one highlighted in yellow, some great Photoshop work by me. In regards to the civil rights movement, like where would your head be? You're not really an active participant. You're just you're a kid trying to live your life. What's going on in your head for the kid that I've highlighted? Give yourself a little backstory, kind of think about how would you interact with your peers? How would you feel being the kind of like the oddball in the group? Sorry about that.
I mean, I'll say being a mom of a kid this age, kids are so much more resilient than we are. And they don't notice differences like we do. It's been built into kind of the education system. But I think that these kids would probably be confused as to why there's so much attention being drawn to their class that day. They're also, there's a new student, so there's probably like excitement about who the new student is and why they're there. And obviously the whole idea of like inclusion and, he looks different than they do. And so just kind of starting to think about how they might learn more about him.
Yeah, definitely. Just like a little follow-up question. It's not really kind of a just like a food for thought. Do you think that having one white student in the classroom would impact the way the Chinese students would eventually think about the civil rights movement and how their perspective would be different than someone who's, say, an active protester in on the East Coast and who's like, how would that be different? Like, what would really change? Because I feel like these kids, personally, I don't think these kids really would do much actively to protest and make a change in the country. I think they're just trying to live their lives. So yeah, would you, I guess along the same lines, it wouldn't really change the way you would think positively or negatively about the other students in the room. What do you think, just based on the differences, because kids kind of don't really think about, the differences, but how do you think the highlighted student would act towards the rest? How, like, what kind of behaviors would be different? Like, how would this kid really be like set aside and set apart from the rest of the kids?
I found this picture really interesting because I'm used to being the only Asian student in the room. So it's like very strange for me to see like a sea of children who like would have looked like me if I was their age, obviously. And then the one like the odd student out being Caucasian. So at least in my experience, I just tried to like not emphasize my differences. Like when I first came to school, I had an Asian accent and I got rid of that real quick. Like I just wanted to be like the other kids. So I would imagine like he might go home. He might have had like the reverse situation I would have had. He might have gone home and asked his parents to like start making him like Chinese American food as opposed to like his regular peanut butter jelly, which I mean, that's just like an interesting image in my head. Like, so like that's what I think of, just like he would want to like blend in with them in some type of way, because kids like are, like Stacey said, really resilient, but also like kids like can start to be kind of mean at a certain age. So like everyone, they start to, when they start to realize the differences, and I feel like he would realize them kind of quickly being front and center of this photo. He might try to like assimilate with like the other students, which I think is really interesting because he is in the majority of the country, but in this classroom, he's like very much the minority.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was actually going to get into that towards the closing, really ahead of the game here. But I do think that we should consider like their age, because I'm not sure how old these kids are, but they look like they're 7, 8-ish. I don't know kids that well. That was just kind of my guess. And with my work with children, I've never worked with that age group, but kids just like, they don't care. And I just want to like, I'm curious to see at what age will these kids start to care, because at first glance, like when I looked at the image, I thought, oh, all the kids are like, what's this white kid doing here? Like, he's different. Like, just like noticing that there's a difference. But I really think that now that I'm considering the fact that there's a photojournalist in the room, they're like, who's this stranger? And they're kind of thinking about like, what's going to happen today? What's different about today? So yeah, I think that's kind of it for this photo, and super fun. We're going to go to the next photo. It's the same exact thing, but we're highlighting the other students. So you're going to put yourself in the place of these kids and think in regards to the civil rights movement and to their families' move to the US. Most of these students are like the first person in their family born in the US. Most of their parents are from China and they came earlier in the 1900s. So like what do you guys think is like going through these kids' minds? They're in a new, like a relatively new school. Their home life is different than the others of normal, or not normal, but other American students. Kind of give yourself a backstory. How do you feel? What's going through your head?
I think these kids would be a little bit confused about the new student based on what my knowledge of Chinese American immigration history. There was a lot of discrimination when these families immigrated into the US, and they primarily lived in immigrant communities like in Chinatown, where there was only Chinese or Chinese American residents. So the fact that somebody of not their nationality or ethnicity is now in their school, I think is something that would really stand out to them, and kind of be a focused topic on their minds.
That's definitely a really good point. Professor Kerr, were you going to say something?
Oh, well, I was just going to echo some of the things that have been said too around like putting oneself in the shoes of someone who's in second grade or third grade. And actually your questions caused me to think back to like, what did I think about as a second grader or a third grader? And, you know, it feels like my priorities were really different. I remember thinking like, oh, did I leave my math homework at home? Or did I forget my money for lunch? Or things like that. And so for me, it shines a spot on, you know, how what we choose to focus on changes over the arc of our lives. And while of course it's impossible for us to really know what these students or the teacher or the photojournalist is really thinking, I think this photograph does really inspire us to wonder, like how do we think about issues of difference or not in our daily lives.
Yeah, definitely. I know that like when I was looking at this photo, I was kind of thinking like these kids are living in an insane historical time. Do they even care? Like they're probably more worried about like figuring out how to tie their shoes, and meanwhile people are fighting for their rights on the other side of the country and all over. And they just have no idea, which is really interesting. So like kind of what kind of makes you think like when these kids grow up, like what are they going to think of this? Like, oh, what did you do like during the civil rights movement? You know, I learned how to tie my shoes. Like it's just kind of funny to think that like you would usually think during the civil rights movement the people that you would think of are the active protesters and like all of these minority groups like fighting for their rights. And when you really think about it, a lot of them are in the situation where they're just trying to assimilate to normal American life and just get used to being in the US and really not that they're not fighting for their rights, but that they're just trying to adjust, and they don't really have the time or like the passion to essentially like be active and really get into fighting for rights. So let's talk more about these kids, because I think kids are hilarious. I love this picture because I love kids. So like, what do you think these kids kind of like say to their parents when they go home? Like, oh yeah, there's a new kid today. He looks different. And what do you think their parents would say? How would that reaction go? What are you guys thinking?
Well, you know, one thing that I think of echoes a bit what Tracy was saying earlier, and thank you, Tracy, for sharing that experience about like quickly losing your accent, you know, to fit in. And I feel like I had a similar experience. I'm from the South originally, and when I moved to Manhattan, I very quickly learned how to lose my Southern accent. But, you know, thinking about you know, really how parents and kids, you know, bring their own experiences to it, and how sometimes, you know, it can be really important for the kids to feel like they fit in and maybe not for the parents, or vice versa. I think this is the big debate that's really hotly contested too around mainstreaming. Like, what does that mean? You know, what does it mean to feel like you want to fit in? I know that for some of my family members and others, you know, when they came to this country, they changed their last name to seem more Americanized. And so, you know, that might be something that these families are thinking about, you know, and not to place a judgment on what it might be, but that might be something that they're all thinking about, is like, how do we create a community where we feel at home and welcome? You know, how do we fit in? All of those questions.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I am keeping track of the time, and I do think we should move on to the next image, which I think this one's my favorite actually. save the best for last. This is the teacher in the back. I think we should kind of think about how, I mean, as someone who's interacted with kids, I do think this is a really important question. It's what do you tell your students when there's a stranger in the classroom? Clearly all these students are, or half of them are like looking at this dude like, who are you? And she's just trying to do her job, but how do you approach your students about this issue? How do you approach your students about what's going on in the country right now while also educating them and intertwining the Chinese culture that the parents wanted? I think personally, like, kids are persistent and they just like want to know. I've worked with 3-year-olds this past summer, and a janitor that they were familiar with was in the room, and they were like, what's he doing here? What's he doing here? And I was like, he's cleaning the sink. And they were just like, why? They always ask why. And kids are so curious, and it's kind of like never ending. And clearly there's a lot of students and one teacher, and it's just such a crazy time. This woman, mad props to her. I think she's doing a great job, killing it in life. She's working hard, clearly, because she has so many students to monitor in such a crazy time with such a weird transition and weird kind of life position that they're all in. And I think having a photojournalist in the classroom is just like another thing to throw on her plate. And I have no idea how she would tell her students that. I'd maybe just be like, I might tell them, it's like, oh yeah, this is a school administrator, and just kind of like, they just want to see what's going on. Or, it's hard to explain this stuff to kids. And I think part of that is also that she has to monitor what she says in regards to the civil rights movement, because it is a touchy subject, especially when it comes to kids who don't fully understand. And she doesn't know what each of the parents are telling all the kids. So she has to be really careful about like what she's telling them. Does anyone want to piggyback on that or say anything kind of like devil's advocate and disagree?
This isn't devil's advocate, but my high school, in light of the Black Lives Matter movement, over the summer sent out an email to like all alumni and like students saying that all of the administrators and teachers were like required to read this book called Teaching When the World is on Fire. And I feel like administrators at that time like probably didn't have as many resources as ours do now. So it like makes me wonder like if like how prepared she was to like be teaching in like such a charged political and like social climate at the time, because now like there's so many resources and information out there readily available to help, like even though like there'll never be enough to like perfectly prepare anyone for this kind of situation. It does make me like wonder if like there was a meeting with the teachers to talk about like how to deal with it if the students asked about it, or if anything like happened, like what would they do, and like those types of questions.
Yeah, definitely. There had to have been some sort of administration at the school that, communicated something with the teachers. And I know that now is a good time to compare this to where, in my experience in my high school, we were very active in, standing for equality and making sure everything's in line. But at the same time, these aren't high schoolers. These are kids who don't really, they're learning how to read. Like they don't have the education to really understand what's going on. And it's this teacher's job to maybe not make them understand, but accept what's going on and just kind of help them transition into their, older student years. So it looks like we're running short on time. If anyone has any like final remarks, I'll give like a couple seconds and then I'll close it up.
I want to quickly play devil's advocate. I know that I can't remember the girl's name, but the first African-American girl to go to a white school, all of the staff and administration at that school didn't want her there, and they went to great lengths to isolate her and put her in her own classroom. So I do think it's important to note that that could have been happening in this situation, and the teacher could have not wanted the new student there at all, or the photojournalist. So
yeah, thank you, Lena. That's a really good point. You don't really think about that, because usually with when you're thinking about the civil rights movement, I remember seeing a video like in 3rd grade. I would sit on the floor with all my friends, and there was like the, big dinosaur TV, and we watched a video about an African American kid who was the only person of color in his school, and it was just like not it for him. Like nobody wanted him there, and he just like dealt with it. And like in some situations, it has to be like this, and it is what it is. But it seems that we've made quite a bit of progress since a time like this, and I think that's a really positive thing. So yeah, I don't want to have to cut anyone off, but it looks like we're running out of time. So I think we should just, well, one, I want to say thank you for all your amazing ideas, because I did not think of half of those. That was crazy to me. And we should consider that, like, in a time like the civil rights movement, we think about those who only think about those who actively protested to make a change in America. And we don't really think about these little victories, like getting the school running. And we don't really think about the impact that it makes on these minority groups, especially in this school in particular. I think that there are a lot of connections that we can draw for each of the perspectives, and considering that we don't really change the way we perceive a situation, it's kind of interesting to step into other people's shoes. I don't know about you guys, but like when I learned about integration and the civil rights movement, it was like, especially in schools, it was the non-white race that was the minority. So I think this is a really cool role reversal, as Tracy mentioned earlier, kind of stealing my thunder there. And it kind of just offers you a completely new perspective and a new thing to think about. So with that, I appreciate all of you guys. Wait, I have to go to the next slide. Oh my. Thank you guys all so much for participating. If you want to see, there's like a big poster, like setup thing on the Greenway. It's still, in my opinion, it's still nice out. It's kind of gotten gross this week, but feel free to visit. It's like, me pointing doesn't do anything at all. It's right over there. But it's really cool to look at all the images and kind of draw connections. So I just wanted to say thank you guys all so much for participating. I thoroughly enjoyed hearing your perspectives, and I hope you guys all have a great weekend. Have fun. Happy Halloween. It's so exciting.
Great. Thank you so much, Brooke, for facilitating this conversation. And thanks to all of you for joining us for this conversation today, and hope that you all have a great weekend, and hope to see you all soon. Take care.
Thank you.